get your hands on anything, whether it's a book, a YouTube video, a podcast like mine or yours, and anything that can help you write headlines, learning how to write good, compelling headlines, how to make $10,000 an hour sharing your story as a public speaker. I mean, you can say what you do in one sentence and it just hits. There's an art to this. It's called copywriting. And you wonder why you look on the news media and social media and it's all negative. Because we pay attention when people talk about our problems. We don't have to like it. It does a lot of destruction in the world. But if you want to keep people's attention, talk about their problems. You don't go into a war zone with an empty weapon. You have to bring your ammo with you. Or the weapon is useless. The tool's useless if you don't have the ammo to put in the weapon. All right? So a good coach, a mentor, somebody can guide you. They can ask you those questions that we just forget to ask, that are valuable.
Hey guys, welcome back to the BID Academy podcast. I'm super excited to have you here as always. And on today's episode, I do have a guest that has a very similar topic that we talked about a couple of weeks ago. And on today's podcast episode, I want to talk actually about podcasting and how you guys can leverage podcasts, either being a guest or starting your own. So I would like to introduce you to Brian Fleming. So the way Brian puts it, he says lots of entrepreneurs and podcasters don't know how to say what they do in a clear, compelling way that gets them noticed by the right people, and they're losing business. Brian Fleming is the host of the PodGasm Marketing podcast, where he shows podcasters and entrepreneurs how to clarify their brand messaging so they can stop struggling to grow and get more people to listen and buy from them. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. I love the name of the podcast. The first time I saw it, I'm like, did I read it right? And then I went to the website. I'm like, yeah, I did read it right. It's like, so guys, for you to understand it, so it's PodGasm, and
That's
guess
right.
So.
Well, I've never met anyone who doesn't like a word or laugh at a word that ends with the suffix gasm. So I thought, hey, that's pretty funny. Yeah. So it was probably 2 a.m. when I thought of it. I didn't put much thought into it. I thought, hey, that's funny, and people will probably talk about it. So if you make something odd or weird or funny, people tend to go, hey, you wouldn't believe what this guy called his podcast. Yeah, it's good word of mouth.
That's usually the case. Awesome. Yeah, could you share with the audience a little bit about yourself? Like I did go through your website. I did see a lot of different things. I know that you've been in the speaking industry. You were a copywriter before. Could you share with the audience a bit of your backstory for them to better understand who you are and where you started?
Yeah, I actually started my adult life in the United States Army. I fought the war in Afghanistan. A suicide bomber actually tried to kill me in Kandahar and almost succeeded. I was horribly injured, spent a year and 2 months at a hospital in Texas. And that has nothing to do with podcasting, but that did lead me into professional speaking. People are asking me to share my story. I realized it was helping people, not because they could relate to what happened to me, but the lessons I learned through my own traumas and injuries, the lessons that helped me get through my battle were also helping other people win their battles. And so I realized I could talk about my story, which is completely different from someone else's, but if I talked about it in the right way, other people would resonate with it deeply and want to engage with me. And so I've been doing that for literally 17 years. I've spoken all over the world, mostly in the United States. But then I started, I've been on hundreds of podcasts, and I realized a lot of podcasts, they don't know how to say what they do in a clear and compelling way, so that when the right people see them, they'll go, ooh, that's for me. Or they don't know how to write, their episode titles in such a way where people have to click. Because you can have the same podcast episode and you can call it one thing or call it, option A or option B. And if option A is kind of weak and option B is really strong and targeted, and it's a good, compelling headline structure, that will get so many more downloads. So it's kind of like the wrapping paper. You can have like a bar of gold, in a Christmas present. If it's wrapped in newspaper, people might overlook it. If it's wrapped in big silver and gold, flashy, shiny wrapping paper, more people are going to notice it and want it. It's the same kind of thing.
That is really very interesting. Well, especially your background. I did not know that part. Wow. So how long ago was that?
That the war injury was in
Yeah.
2006.
Okay.
Yeah, it was a
So
little while ago.
almost 20 years. Oh, 18.
I don't sound old enough. I don't feel like I'm old enough to say that.
You don't honestly, you don't look old at all.
Yeah, I just
Uh,
turned 40.
oh, there you go. I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't give you 40.
I'm glad. I'm in the gym 5 mornings a week, so it's helping, I guess,
Okay,
hopefully.
oh yeah. Speaking of 5 mornings a week, I'm trying to change my routine as well because I would usually train at night. I used to do taekwondo for 15 years, and it'd always be trainings at night, like 6
Mm.
p.m., 7 p.m., depending on the training. And but yeah, now I'm trying to like do the everything in the morning and then take care of the rest during the day. Okay, cool. So speaking of the podcast, you mentioned that a lot of podcasters they simply don't know what title to use. Let's say like how to create the right title, because there are and you coming from the world of copywriting, uh, like you're the perfect person for that to explain how that works, because copywriting is basically selling through words.
Mhm.
Are there any tools that you'd recommend them to? Any tools, any resources, any books that they should read in order to understand how to become a better podcasters? Because in
Yeah,
case with again, like podcasting is it depends on the type of a podcast, I guess, uh, but it's storytelling in a way, and copywriting is all about storytelling.
yeah, I would recommend get your hands on anything, whether it's a book, a YouTube video, a podcast like mine or yours, and anything that can help you write headlines, learning how to write good, compelling headlines. And because one of the big mistakes that podcasters make is they're speaking their message from their own perspective and not from their listeners' perspective. You see, like you don't want to be like the main character in the story, so to speak. You want to be the person to help. You want to be Yoda to Luke Skywalker. You know what I mean? You don't want to be Luke. You want to be Yoda because you know when people listen to your podcast, they're trying to get somewhere, and they love people who go, "Hey, I know how you can get there. I have some advice that can help you." Or I have some advice that can help you not get blown up or step on a landmine. Like the listener's on a battlefield and they're trying to get from point A to point B without getting destroyed completely. Now, on a podcast, that might sound extreme. You might say, well, it's how does that relate to some podcasts? Well, they're comedy podcasts. Okay, well, some people are sitting in traffic and they hate it and they're bored and they're frustrated. So they want some comic relief. They want to listen to something that makes them laugh and feel good. They're here and they want to be here. Or you could have a real estate podcast and teaching real estate agents how to sell more real estate. Well, you have people here listening who want to sell more and they're not, and then you can teach them how to sell 5 more houses a month over here. And so there's this in between. That's where your podcast exists. It exists as a tool for leading your very specific ideal listeners across a battlefield so they can get to the other side where they're trying to go. You tell them where to step and where not to step. And that comes in the form of, what to do, what not to do. Being able to talk to them in such a way that they understand that you know where they are and they can understand also that you have the credibility that you're actually giving them good advice that'll work.
Mm-hmm.
Because some people talk and I don't trust them. I'm like, they sound really good, but I know a lot about this topic, and that really doesn't, I'm questioning their credibility. Well, you don't want that to happen. So there's ways of establishing that.
Okay, so then in case with podcasters, so let's say if we will take any, well, let's take a personal development podcast because that's something that I'm listening to, like lots of different podcasts. Would you suggest to someone who is starting out or they've been doing it for a while, but maybe it's not working, it's not clicking? Would you suggest them to niche down into something specific in a specific industry or specific topics?
Yes. And here's the reason. When you're starting off and you're not a famous known name, like I could have put my name on my artwork cover for my podcast, but it doesn't matter because most people don't know me. They say, well, you can have a podcast about anything. Look at Joe Rogan. Well, he has the biggest podcast in the world. That's not the same thing. The only show about nothing that ever worked is called Seinfeld. And for some reason it worked. And you and I are not the exception. It's not going to work again. But when you are, think about this, and I use a lot of military analogy because that's just how my brain works due to past life experience. When you're starting a podcast or a business, starting anything new, do you want to have a very specific kind of person, as specific as you're able to, in mind? Not only that, but you want to know where they are in the journey. Because what a lot of people do, take this military example, I could take a shotgun and I could shoot the broadside of a barn and just try to hit just hit as much of the big side of the barn as I can. Or I can get my sniper rifle and I can try to shoot this top little 4-inch corner up in the top left of the door. Very precise precision targeting. That's what you want. Because when you do that, now you can effectively communicate from a place of value with a group of people. So for example, if I have a background in the military, so let's say I've done a lot of speaking for the military. I've done marriage training for the military. So when I was trying to get booked to speak for the military, I would say, okay, I'm going after American military meeting planners on military bases. I'm going to talk to their soldiers about how to have a better marriage after coming home from war, because that's what I did. I've been married almost in 2 weeks. It'll be 19 years, and I got married 3 months before I went to Afghanistan. So it's lasted. Well, if I'm going after American military personnel and their meeting planners who have the power and the money to book me to speak, if I have a podcast that solves their problem, mental health and returning home from war and post-traumatic stress issues, overcoming those in order that a military service member can have a better, more healthy and fulfilling marriage. Do you see how specific that is? It wasn't just like have a better relationship. Mm-hmm. It's targeted. When people see that and people say, well, I've been booked so much by that audience. Well, of course I have. Because when they saw me, they're like, holy crap, this guy is like literally the perfect fit for our next event. And I manufactured that on purpose because I have good information that actually helps them. And so it's my job to make that wrapping paper very, very appealing. Like if you're going fishing, deep sea fishing, you don't use a worm like you do in a small lake. You use other fish that are bigger as the bait.
Yeah.
So think about that with your podcast. Like, who exactly are you going after? And the more specific you can be, real quick, and I'll be done. But what happens is you get enough of those people noticing you, listening to you, and talking about you. And suddenly, over time, it just grows and grows and grows. It's like rings in the water when you throw a rock in the water in a pond and the rings go out. Eventually, people start to catch on, whether they're in your audience or not.
Okay. So then in this case, would you recommend someone to, let's say if somebody wants to start a podcast, but most of the times they don't have the time because podcasting takes, I'm going to call it a part-time job in a way, especially in the beginning.
Yeah.
So it does take a bit of time unless you have someone who you could basically hire and help you with all the production, post-production, breaking down the short clips, promoting it on social media. Would you suggest someone to, first of all, go to podcasts as a guest and try to figure out their messaging that way, like to targeting their ideal audience, basically?
The first thing I would do, whether I'm starting a business or a podcast, you need to find who you want to help and what their big problem is specifically, because people only spend money and attention on their problems, solving problems. Every business in the world that makes money is solving a problem. I wanted a Kit Kat candy bar the other day when I was at the grocery store in the checkout line. I had a problem. I wanted a Kit Kat and I didn't have one. Well, for $2, I could get one. So I handed over $2 and I got my Kit Kat candy bar. It's the same thing. So you have to identify who are you wanting to help specifically, and what is their biggest problem. Or I would pick one to go on, but there's maybe 2 or 3 big ones, because now you know what to talk about. And if you don't know what their biggest problem is maybe it's one, it's not a good audience because you don't know them, or two, go to them and say, hey, about this thing in our industry or whatever. What do you struggle with? What really frustrates you? What is like the big obstacle that's always in your way you're trying to get past? And then when you have a podcast episode about 3 of the easiest ways to quickly get past XYZ problem, they go, whoa, I have that problem. There's 3 simple ways to get past that, or a 3-step process where I can get through that. You see, now you know what to insert into your language, because now you're speaking their language, because you know what they want to accomplish. You know what they want to avoid. You know what's getting in their way. You know the frustration, the story going on in their head. I call it propaganda. It's like, oh, there's this big obstacle. Like, I don't know how to start a podcast. And then the propaganda is like, well, my voice sounds weird. Nobody would probably listen to it anyway. All those self-defeating thoughts. When you start talking to those things in their head, they go, oh my gosh, like, this guy gets me. This lady gets me. There's an old marketing phrase that says, enter the conversation already going on in your customer's head. You can't do that if, my podcast is for men. Okay, well, what about it? What problem are you solving? Finances, relationships, confidence? What you have to choose. So choose them. Yeah, health, exactly. So choose who you're going after and what the problem is you're going to solve for them that they know they have, and they hate that problem extremely.
Yeah, this makes so much sense. Like people like to say the riches are in the niches, and going after the specific niche, that's the way to go, especially in the beginning.
Yeah, it's just so hard to get discovered if you're general in the beginning and nobody knows who you are.
Yeah,
you become sort of an icon in a very small corner of a niche, but then people will start to know you over time, and you become known as like that whatever guy who teaches leadership to brand new real estate agents or something, or whatever your thing is.
Yeah. The specific service for that specific ICP. Just for you guys to, if you don't know what ICP means, it stands for Ideal Client Profile. It's like us marketers like to throw in somewhere sometimes.
yeah, your avatar, your ideal customer. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So then with the podcast itself, so what do you usually help your clients with when it comes down to podcasting?
I show podcasters how to create a clear and compelling brand message that will grow their podcast, because I teach them how to say what they do from their customer's perspective, so that when the right person is scrolling through the feed on their phone or wherever they're listening to podcasts, and they see the name of it, they see the description, they see some episode titles, they relate to it, and they go, oh, that's for me. When I was teaching, public speaking, I've been getting booked and paid to speak for over a decade and a half. I was teaching that to other people how to do. Mm-hmm. And when I had a title of a class or an episode I was doing called How to Make $10,000 an Hour Sharing Your Story as a Public Speaker, I got a lot of people listening to it. Or even how to make your first $500 speaking, because that's a little more doable in most people's minds. And I mean, that got downloaded. I don't even know how many times offhand right now, but I was speaking to a specific kind of person, and I was solving a specific problem. I knew what they're dealing with. And so I teach podcasters how to clarify their marketing brand message. This is your about section description. These are not just your episode titles, but also your episode descriptions. And it even goes down into like what are the tags being used on your podcast and in your episodes? What words are people searching for to fix the problem, or of whatever they're searching for? Whatever you can do to figure that out. I teach them how to do that. So I teach them how to say what they do, so more people show up and subscribe.
Okay, that's awesome, and I can definitely attest to that. That it's extremely important to have the right hooks, the right description. Speaking of hooks, I used to have a podcast. I called it Marketing Hooks. I did it
Hmm.
for yeah. I had about 20 episodes, and then I stopped it, and then we launched a new consultancy. So basically, this podcast is sponsored by that consultancy. But yeah, the thing that you mentioned about podcasts. So in your case, you mostly work with people that already have a podcast, right?
I work I work mainly
Most of
with
the times.
with with new and growing podcasters.
Okay, got
So
it.
there could be a podcaster who's been doing it 2 years and they go, "Man, I still feel like I'm new and I'm still learning." I'm totally for you. And if you just started a podcast and you really don't know, your head from a hole in the ground, then hey, I'm for you especially. Because here's the thing: so many people start a podcast and they fail. It just fades out. Most of them do, and one of the biggest reasons is because they're so general that they blend in with everything else. It's like they're a blade of grass in a field. They just they just blend in with everyone else. They don't stand out. They're not distinct. What will make you stand out and make you distinct and noticeable is having a clear, compelling message. When you can say what you do in one sentence and it just hits. There's an art to this. It's called copywriting. And I've been doing it a while. That's why I know how to do it. And I do it I write out for podcasters if they want to hire me for consulting. I just write it out for them. I go, here you go, copy and paste this. Now you know you're targeted now. And now you know what direction, how to steer your titles and your topics, or even what guests to bring on. Some people bring on guests who have nothing to do with their topic, and you wonder, like, why did they? It was a good person, nice person, good message, but where was that leading? It's because they lacked that clarity that they were also bringing on the wrong guest. And guess what happened? Listeners go, why would? Okay, it was nice, but I listen to this podcast so I can grow my podcast, not so I can get inspired by a story of resilience of a guy who was born with no arms and no legs or something. Like, it was fine. It's just not the reason they listened to it. And so it helps you, having a clear message helps you determine all these things and get everything in alignment from the start. Because if it's in alignment from the start, you have a way greater probability of succeeding.
Okay, yeah, and then the part that I mentioned, like if you bring in the wrong type of people to the podcast, it honestly it truly doesn't make any sense because I've listened to some podcasts. I'm like, why? What is this guy talking about exactly?
Yeah, or it's like being at a live event and the guy's talking. Maybe it's a business conference or in a church or whatever, and you've been sitting there 38 minutes and you're looking around going, the hell is this guy talking? Like, why is he even talking? I'm so lost. Like, where is this even going? That's the speaker's fault. That's the
Hmm.
podcaster's fault. If people get lost, it's your fault. It's my fault. And so having a clear and compelling message for the right people, that's what hooks them, gets them in, and keeps them in because you keep talking to their problems. There's a guy I used to be affiliated with, Don Miller, with Story Brand. And
Hmm.
he said the moment you stop talking about your customer's problem, they stop listening to you. And he said they'll go listen to someone else who will keep talking about their problem. And you wonder why you look on the news media and social media and it's all negative because
Yeah,
we pay attention when people talk about our problems.
yeah,
We don't have to like it. It does a lot of destruction in the world. But if you want to keep people's attention, talk about their problems.
yeah. Well, speaking of attention, with the recent results on the election, I don't know if you looked at the numbers on the podcast and how podcasts made a huge difference, and the difference between one side or the other,
I
and
didn't
how.
actually.
Okay, like you can look into like there are a couple of videos like people are creating videos on YouTube, and they're showing like so let's say what type of podcast Trump went to, and how many videos those got, and then the same thing with Kamala. That was really interesting. Like podcasting industry start. I guess 2024 is gonna be a marketing case study at this point for
Interesting.
especially for podcasting. Yeah, because people don't watch necessarily traditional media as much, and they trust people like me and you because we are here and we pretty much have a genuine conversation. But yeah,
Yeah.
I looked at that, like I saw the numbers, I was like, wow, that was impressive.
Yeah, I have no doubt that podcasting, I mean, has that kind of effect on society, whether it's like a presidential election or or something else. Because when you're talking, when you and I or any other podcasts are listening, when people listen to you enough, they get to know you, they get to trust you, they get to go, this guy's not a pushover. He's not gonna just say something wild. Therefore, I can trust him. Well, they often make not only voting decisions and things like that based on the influence, but also if you have a program or a service that can help them that they can buy, they're more prone to make buying decisions, and you can, more easily monetize your podcast. But what you just said is so on point, and it's because podcasting, people get to know us, and I mean, it's such a powerful thing. Just getting to hear someone so much who's knowledgeable on something that we like, and then we get to know the personality of that person. And if you meet them on the street, like, know everything about them and they know nothing about you.
Yeah, exactly. Well, speaking of meeting them on the street, sometimes like I'm sure you know Grant Cardone.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I've been watching his content or consuming his content for a couple of years, and then about 2 years ago I was in Phoenix, and then they started a new company, and then they did their first business, what they call it. It was basically a 3-day business conference, not the 10x growth, like a smaller conference, and I got to meet everyone basically on who was on his team, the pilot, a couple of other people, and I would just go up to them, like we chit chat a little bit, and it felt like I knew them really well, like I knew them for years, even though it was the first time me meeting them.
Exactly.
So that's the effect of the video itself and the podcasting as well. So
yeah, now
it depends on the person.
Yeah, well, imagine if Grant just had a podcast on sort of everything. You may have never listened to it because you may have found him when you were searching on something for sales or marketing or branding. You might have come across it because you were looking for something. And if he had been so broad, he's talking about nature and animal rights and global warming and, psychedelic therapies and, animal mating strategies, along with some marketing and finance. Like, you'd have breezed right past him. You probably never would have gotten in his whole sphere of influence.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah. I mean, I guess the only person that can talk about all those things is Joe Rogan. But at this point, he's been doing it for like so many years.
Well, and here's why it works for him. Like I said, he's the biggest podcast in the world at the time, so he can do what he wants. But the reason he can do that is because he brings on, whether you like him or not, it doesn't matter. He brings on anything from insane, wild to incredibly interesting, knowledgeable, incredibly smart people, and he talks to them about their thing. And so he brings on great guests.
Yeah.
Now he's had some celebrity push, obviously, and that's helped him, and more power to him. But like you said, like, he brings on great guests. That's why he always has an interesting guest. Sometimes they're dressed in a ghillie suit and a gas mask, and other times he's in an astronaut suit, and he's he's on his 5th joint for the evening. And it's like, oh, Elon Musk just took a big toke. Like, oh wow, hey, that gets attention. So yeah, he can do that because he already has a big established name in podcast, and he brings on interesting guests. Yeah.
Which makes sense. Okay. So what would you advise to, let's say, people who are starting a podcast or they are in the podcasting game, and if they're listening right now, how can they grow their show? How they can grow the podcast?
Yeah, 2 things you want to do. This is in any business, whether it's podcasting or you own a business, whatever the case. You need to get your messaging on point. Like, you don't. Again, here's a military example. You don't go into a war zone with an empty weapon. You have to bring your ammo with you, or the weapon is useless. The tool's useless if you don't have the ammo to put in the weapon. All right. Well, a lot of people, they show up, they go, I got a podcast, whatever, but they have no ammo. If I try putting AK-47 ammo into an American military M4 carbine like I used to have, it doesn't work. They're different rounds. They're different sizes. It just doesn't work. So you get the right ammo. This is your wording. This is your messaging. What the whole thing that I'm about and I talk about on my podcast. You craft that specific, clear, compelling message that you can hit the right target with and get the job done. Then you show up and you, let's say, for one big thing, one great thing to do is find other people who serve your same audience, but in the same, similar, or a different way. And you show up and you just add value. And you add value by unloading your ammo, unloading your value. Like when I show up to a military base or I talk to a military meeting planner, and I say, hey, I'm a combat wounded veteran from the war in Afghanistan. I've been married 19 years, deployed, 3 months after I got married. And I would love to share with your soldiers who have an 83% divorce rate how I've been able to stay married all these years and how they can enhance their marriages as well so they can have better lives, better families, and they can be better when they come to work every day. Would that be of any interest to you? It's a hey, stupid question. Of course, I hit everything on the point because I didn't show up with an empty weapon. I showed up with the right words for the right people, and I planned on how I was going to present that. So in summary, get your messaging right. Clarify your marketing branding message and make it clear and compelling, which is what I teach how to do. And then go take that to every group you can find that already exists and is serving your same audience. Because here's the deal. Those other podcasters, for example, they're always looking for great, valuable content to give to their people. Because as a podcaster, we have to create this stuff. And if someone has a great message already, we could go, man, if we could just get them on, I could just interview them and facilitate, but let them do all the talking. So it's a win for the podcasters. But it also helps the audience because the audience walks away going, wow, that was really good. I'm so glad, this podcast had that guy on, that lady on. And so get your messaging right and then go put it in front of the right people. It's like throwing gas on a fire. But you can't do that if you're general. If you're too general, it doesn't work. It's like throwing water on the fire. Whoops, wrong can.
So the third point would be niching down into something specific.
Yeah. And this is something every new business and podcast that it's basic advice, but it's something we all have to do. And it's one of the harder things to do by yourself. For some reason, for me at least, it was always until I knew really how to do it well. Even though I teach this stuff, I still mess it up. Like I'm the only one. I'm like the only podcast I can't help because I'm in my own bubble. Even though I know this stuff and I teach it, sometimes I forget little concepts because I'm so close to it, and we all do that though.
Yeah, 100%. Like can't agree more with you on that because we actually had a conversation with my business partner regarding this earlier. I would say in summer this year, where we basically know what our clients need to do. Like we tell them what they need to do in order to get results. But then at the same time, we kind of know what we need to do. We do that, but some things don't work. And so we found a company that we started to work with business coaches. Because you do need to have somebody from the outside of your bubble, as you said, who can guide you through the process. And of course, bring you to where you want to be based on their knowledge and experience. And as I said earlier, during this episode, right, I think it was right in the beginning when you said that people sometimes come out, whether it's on a podcast or on stage, and they talk about something, and it doesn't even make sense. Yeah, so you want to make sure that you do hire people that know what they're talking about.
And one of the things with having a coach or a mentor, somebody outside of your thing looking at it, the thing is, they have a different perspective on what you're doing than you do. Like if you're boots on the ground, you're the guy, the grunt, like I was on the ground in the war zone. Well, the guy flying the plane overhead, over top of my battlefield, he can see things I can't see. Now, he doesn't know what it's like to be a grunt on the ground, and he doesn't need to. All he needs to do is tell me where to go and not to go. If my small 17-man platoon's about to run up on 100 enemy forces, hey, don't go over that ridge line. Like, stop. Don't wait for us. We will help, But they look down. Like, you think of even like Michael Jordan, Tiger Woods, like two of the greatest athletes in their sports of all time in the history of ever. They had coaches, but the coaches were not better than Michael Jordan. Tiger Woods' coach was not better than him at golf. They could see things that the genius was doing that they could do a little bit better and tweak that the genius couldn't see because he's so close to himself. You're just too close to your thing. So that's the value of having somebody look at what you're doing and don't think like, yeah, they need to be qualified for sure. But you'd be surprised who we discount, who can actually help us the most, just because they have that different perspective.
Honestly, everything that you just shared, those are just gold nuggets, dropping bombs. You can call it however you want it, but people definitely need to go back, I would say 2 minutes, and listen to it once again. Because that was a lot of gold. And as you mentioned, the fundamental. So sometimes we forget about the simple things, which are the fundamentals, and it's really the fundamentals that work. And most of the times, it's fundamentals at scale. So when you figure out how to do fundamentals, and then you can scale with that, there are no limits.
Yeah, and you know what happens too is as we become better at something that we're the experts in, which is probably the topic of most podcasts, as you get better and become an expert at something, or you're just very, very good at it, you become familiar with it. And what happens when you become familiar with what you do, you start to forget what it was like in the beginning, the struggles you had and what it was like, and the fears and frustrations or the battles you had to fight, the things that stood in your way, because you're so used to being where you are now that you often just forget what it was like to be that new person. Well, with so many businesses and so many podcasts, the people they're trying to reach, it is them 2 or 5 or 10 or 15 years ago, but they forgot what it was like to be that person. So that's why this happens to everybody. It's that we get familiar. Like if you want to talk public speaking, I can tell it to them blue in the face and teach it. I have how to get booked and paid to speak. I know all that, but I have to really think hard to think back 16, 17 years ago to go, what was my biggest fear starting off? Like, I haven't thought about that in so long because I'm in a different space now with it. So a good coach, a mentor, somebody can guide you. They can ask you those questions that we just forget to ask that are valuable.
Yeah, it does happen. And I've noticed it. The same thing with myself and with our clients. Okay. Could you share with people, or with the audience, basically, where can they find you? Where can they learn more about you? And maybe there are different resources that they can get for themselves.
Yeah, if you're a podcaster or even a business owner, this resource will help you. If you go to PodGasmShow.com, it's on the screen there, and I'm sure it'll be in the notes. I have a free resource there called How to Speak Your Listener's Language. Speak Your Listener's Language. And it's a very simple 6 or 7 step process that shows you how to break down a very clear, compelling message and craft it. And then I even give you the structure, fill in the blank structure, and an example of how to do this right after that. So there's a fill in the blank, then there's an example of it. And what the thing that's so powerful about this is that someone can download this for free, answer the 6 or 7 questions. I mean, it's only like a 3-page PDF. I mean, it's super short. But they can walk away in the next 10 minutes or so with a paragraph that says what they do in such a clear and compelling way that anybody who's in their ideal target market who reads that is going to go, oh man, I need to know more about this. Or wow, this is exactly what I'm looking for. And it's because it's intentionally crafted to do that. So think about this. If you have a podcast and you're thinking, hey, how do I make my about section better? So if someone reads it real quick, I can get them in and want to listen to an episode. You can literally copy and paste after you go through this PDF, just these few questions, write out this 2-sentence thing. You can literally copy and paste that into your podcast host as your podcast description, and it's clarified. It's done. And it's easy. And this is a free resource. Yeah, go to PodGasmShow.com, and it's called Speak Your Listener's Language. It's the first thing you see. And, this is something I used to charge money for, and I still do with businesses. But it's a win I can give you fast. that can help you get clarity on that and make your message more compelling to the right people so they'll keep coming back and tell their friends about your podcast.
Oh, that's awesome. I'll definitely go and download it myself. Well, the most important part, guys, if you get it for yourself, if you download it, make sure you implement it, because people like to say knowledge is power, which is a little bit of BS, because applied knowledge is power.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, Brian, thanks a lot for coming to today's to the podcast itself. Thanks for being on the show. I do appreciate your time. As I always like to say, time is the most valuable asset, and I appreciate you sharing it with me.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Alex. This has been great. I look forward to seeing where you go in the future and in any way I can help you out.
Sounds good. We'll definitely chat about that.